Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Happy Saturday. Welcome to another incredible session, inshallah, on Al-Dukhan today, Surah 44. Oops, I'm tangled here. So I just wanted to share, we had another reflection group last night, and I got permission from the sheikh to share another pop quiz that we got. We have trauma that comes with the pop quiz because they're really difficult and they're very painful. But they're so good because they're really, the questions obviously are intended to ask us questions to think about things that we would clearly rather be asked now and think about now before it's too late. And so we had two questions last night that were of that genre. One was, if you imagine that now, halaqas, you're dead, your time on this earth is over, and you are confronting, God asking you, what is the one sin that you are most scared about being asked about or being held accountable for now that you are on death, you're dead? And that was a very difficult question. And the second question is, of all of the good things that you've done in this life, what would you want God to consider in your favor? What is the one thing that you would have done in your life that hopefully would help, put your book in good favor, because this is what you did in your life. So it was a very powerful reflection. And all of these questions, again, are really intended for us to reflect on ourselves and our life, and perhaps what we need to do to change, and what our opportunities are before it's too late. And then the second thing that I wanted to share, first of all, I want to apologize because I get a lot of email, the professor gets a lot of email, people send a lot of questions, really important questions, and we are really, just so overwhelmed with all kinds of things, especially the time it takes to do 2 surahs and all of the other things that go on with Project Illumine. So I'm constantly wanting to apologize because I'm not answering email, I'm not keeping up on things that I normally would be better at doing. So I want to first thank you and ask you for your patience, and if you haven't heard from me for a long time, definitely feel free to write again. One of the things that I thought that I wanted to share was an email that I got this week that kind of touches on a question that I get often. And so let me read it to you. I fully intend to answer the questions raised here in one way, shape, or form. I first was thinking that I would do it as an email, and I may still do that, but I thought I would first share it here so I can talk it through. So, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you very much for the work you do in supporting the Sheikh in his teachings about the Quran. I'm curious to know whether yourself or the Sheikh considers the hijab, himar, for Muslim women is mandatory, or whether it is mandatory but leeway is given for those on a journey of self-realization to accept it at their own time and with their own conviction. I am trying not to be judgmental, but find it difficult to share some of your work with close female relatives who have struggled because of their choice of wearing the hijab. They feel that while someone may be intelligent and scholarly, there is no legitimacy or credibility to their voice if they haven't grasped the enormity of a Quranic directive. The answer I most likely will get from them, based on experience, is, how can someone speak so passionately and intelligently about the Quran when they haven't embodied some of its basic commands? May Allah forgive me and guide me to the right path if my question offends you, and we are all human to feel offended. My apologies in advance. So, clearly hijab is one of these issues that all Muslim women grapple with, and especially people who are converts. I think female converts have a particularly difficult time. And oftentimes it becomes a barrier to conversion. I mean, certainly in our experience, we've had many people who fall in love with the thought and fall in love with the Quran, and then they hear from people at the mosque that if they don't convert, that they can't become Muslim. Or sorry, if they don't wear hijab, they can't convert and become Muslim. So people actually leave, which I think is an incredible sin, the idea of turning people away from your faith because you have forced them into believing that the scarf is something that is a mandatory, you know, almost like a sixth pillar. And, you know, I remember that back in 1996, shortly after the professor and I met, he was teaching at UT Austin. This was a huge issue for some of the students there. And there was one woman that I remember who was French, and she was, you know, so excited about the Quran class that the professor was teaching at the time, would come to class and just be, you know, like, kind of like how we are here, just so excited about what we're hearing. And so she would seriously think about converting. And then she would go to the local mosque, which unfortunately was very Wahhabi, and she would get the very clear message: no, you have to wear scarf first in order to convert. She eventually left. She didn't convert. She went back to France. We don't know what happened to her, but we had many conversations. And I remember when the sheikh would say, listen, this is an issue of, like, you know, the tail wagging the dog, right? I mean, we should think about bigger issues before we think about issues like the scarf. So you know, there's a lot to be said about this. It's, you know, I mean, after a while, it becomes a little bit irritating. You know, I'm not offended, and, you know, I think it's an important point of education. And, you know, I've certainly addressed this in other talks that I've given, and so one of the things that I would like to provide is resources. I mean, if people are watching and they've made it this far and able to listen to me without a scarf, alhamdulillah, thank you. But some of the resources that you might want to consider, you know, certainly the professor has written about this issue in Search for Beauty, and there are a lot of, you know, sites to the, you know, specific verses in the Quran which address this issue. You know, is hijab actually a Quranic directive? And then in 1996, when the students raised this issue, they really asked if the sheikh could hold a halaqah and talk about the issues and the evidence around the hijab. And so he went through a very lengthy halaqah where he actually did go through, you know, the evidence, the history, the context, the anthropology, the different legal rulings, all the different things. And it was not to make a point one way or another, but it was just to lay all the evidence out there and to allow you to come to your own conclusions. And interesting, a lot of the people who raise these questions are male. Like this you know, email came to me. It's from a gentleman, he signs himself as husband and father. And I know oftentimes when the sheikh gets this question from males, his answer is, well, why do you care? You're not a woman, you don't wear a scarf. But I mean, not to be, you know, cheeky about it, but just to say, you know, these are individual decisions that have to be made, you know, between a woman and her God. And I've also talked about the reasons why I have chosen not to wear hijab in several of my introductions. I think if anyone's interested, you know, they could look up on YouTube, you know, enter, put in my name and hijab. And so, and sorry, this halaqah that was done back in 1996 is available actually on SoundCloud, and also we are working on preparing it for publication, so you can actually read it as a book. So I'm excited to talk about that very soon, inshallah. But so in order to, you know, address this question, I thought about many different ways that I could answer the question. And, you know, I'll talk about it more, but, you know, because we work here in the spirit of critical thinking, you know, I just want to pose a couple of questions back. So, you know, I've been speaking here at the Usuli Institute since its founding, which was back in December of 2017. And from the very first halaqah we had, I spoke. And every single halaqah since then, I've also spoken. And so I have to pose the question, you know, if you come to the Usuli Institute and you recognize that you're learning from a sheikh like, you know, Dr. Abul Fadl, and with his wisdom and knowledge, why do you think, and I'm his wife, why do you think I am allowed to speak at the beginning of every halaqah without wearing hijab? What does that possibly point to? Either it could be that I'm a sinner and he's just allowing me to sin, or, you know, maybe he, you know, there's more to this picture, you know, and our whole point of existence is education, critical thinking, dignity, questioning the status quo, understanding, you know, the depth of things. And so I just posed that question to think about, why do you think he would allow his wife to speak in front of everyone without a scarf? Secondly, you know, I guess the other question is, what does it mean when we know that our greatest jihad, our greatest struggle, our greatest, point of importance as Muslims is to seek knowledge. And what does it mean when you don't allow yourself knowledge because you're not willing to hear it from a woman without a scarf? And what does that mean when, for example, you go to the doctor and you try to get medical advice, or you go to a psychologist and you try to get mental health advice, or you try to get tax advice, or you try to get any kind of advice that is of importance in your life that affects you as a Muslim? Does that mean that you will only accept knowledge from someone who's wearing a scarf? Just to throw these questions out there to ponder. And what will happen if God says to you, well, you asked specific questions about being a faithful Muslim, and I directed you to the Usuli Institute, and I directed you to someone who was focusing on the Quran, and you decided that you didn't want to listen because a woman spoke without wearing a scarf. Like, what is your accountability in that situation? Just to throw that out there to think about, and maybe we can talk about it more in future things. So it's a very important question, because one of the things that's very heartbreaking for me is when I hear about people who are considering conversion, and I see people write, the hardest thing that I have to grapple with in my conversion is the fact that hijab is absolutely mandatory in Islam, and that I'm committing a sin as a Muslim when I'm not wearing a scarf, even though I have such a serious problem with it, and that wearing a scarf shakes my faith. I mean, these are the kinds of things that I think are tragic, because, even the whole idea of converting, like when you think about all the things a person has to overcome to choose a new religion and to decide to start this journey, all the different things that a person has to change in their life and question and revisit and interrogate, to all have it come down to whether or not you wear a scarf is definitely the tail wagging the dog. So, to be continued. Thank you. Assalamu alaikum.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wassalamu ala Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa taba'u bi ihsani ila yawm ad-din. Allahumma shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul 'uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. Inshallah, today we will do Surah Ad-Dukhan, which translates to smoke. Dukhan is smoke. And as you see, inshallah, it will be a fascinating journey. I want to just, because of what Grace said, what Grace talked about, one, I do want to second the point about receiving messages and not being as responsive as I ideally would like to. I get a lot of messages. In the old days, people had to go through the trouble of writing a letter and getting an envelope and writing the address, putting a stamp. Nowadays, it's as easy as just sending an email. And I often wondered if I had a private secretary, maybe life could have been much easier. But since I don't, keeping up with all the correspondences is really impossible. but I do feel very bad about it because I get a lot of messages that I really do want to respond to, and I just can't find enough time. Um, but I try my best to read everything, and so I make an effort to eventually respond, even if it takes me too long. But I have received messages that I intended to respond to, and I never did, and which I feel bad about, because some of them were legitimately, either good questions or very people expressing what is in their soul and their heart, and they deserve the response. So Surah Al-Dukhan was, as we'll see, it is it fascinating at so many levels. The message is in many ways heart wrenching. I mean, it really reaches into your soul and demands a response from you. It was revealed, most reports, the more reliable reports and the majority of reports say that it was revealed right after Surah Taha. And right before Surah Al-Shu'ara. Taha, Ad-Dukhan, and Al-Shu'ara, these three surah, we covered Taha, we haven't covered the Shu'ara, are surah that interrogate the nature of reality and the way that you deal with the reality that you live in and the way that you understand reality and in many ways form reality and construct reality. Having been revealed after Taha, that means it was after surah that we've covered like Qaf and Sad, after Yasin, after Furqan, after Surah Fatir. And in terms of order of revelation, it was very likely that it's somewhere in the mid-40s. By one count, it would be number 46 in order of revelation. Or if not 46, it would be 45, 46, 47, depending on your assessments of earlier surah. Okay, so, but in terms of surah we've covered, so it is before Surah Al-Zumar and Surah Al-Ghafir and Surah Al-Jathiyah, Surah Al-Ahqaf, which are surah that we've covered, and before surah like Luqman, which we have not covered, or Saba, or Shura, or Zukhruf, again, surah that we haven't covered. It is towards the end of the early Meccan period and the beginning of the middle Meccan period, and which, as we know from Surah Taha, that it was right on the cusp of the escalation of Meccan persecution of Muslims. And the most intriguing thing about Surah Al-Dukhan is that reference to smoke and a reference, as we will see, to human addiction to a certain type of doubt, which then raises the question of the connection, possible connections between reference to smoke and certain types of doubt that human beings are addicted to. And this doubt is what the Quran refers to as playful doubt. Yeah, maybe a better translation, as we'll see, would be I don't we'll describe it as we come to it, but I'm searching for an English equivalent, and it's not occurring to me. But it is it's a doubt in which you are addicted to the state of doubt. Your state of being becomes a non-committal state, and you are addicted to being uncommitted, and to use doubt in a speculative but not serious fashion. It is not the type of skepticism that leads to deeper inquiry and deeper knowledge of things, but a type of skepticism that is there for its own sake. Okay. So let's jump in with there are numerous things that the surah raises, and try to take them one at a time. So first, the surah starts out with Hamim, and as we said before, these surah, there are several chapters in the Quran that start with these letters, Hamim, and these surah are known as the Hawamim. They're referred to as the Hawamim. And the Hawamim collectively have often been referred to as the heart of the Quran or soul of the Quran because of their nature, of the type of message they deliver. There is a great deal, as we've talked about before, about the meaning of Hamim, but in the context of Surah Ad-Dukhan, you find a rich discourse on what Hamim refers to in the context of Surah Ad-Dukhan. And among Rami, can I ask you one of these weird questions? Is there any way that I can, like, you see how I can't, like, I have to move this around to read it? Oh, amazing.
You can zoom in like that.
Okay.
Let me shrink that for you. But is that
That's
too
great.
small?
Yeah, no, it's good.
Okay.
Wow. Amazing. I struggled with this all night last night, and Rami just did it in 2 seconds. So depressing. It's like the magicians of the Pharaoh. They do things, and beyond human comprehension.
I'm not a magician. I'm not one of the Pharaoh's magicians.
You're not the magician. The people who made this are the magicians. You just learned their magic so you can defeat them, but wow. Okay, so among the most remarkable things that emerged in our tradition is people like Al-Qushayri say that the ha refer to the rights of God, حق الإله. But the meme refers to محبة الإله, to the love of God. And that the Qushayri, among the scholars, who said if you study the Hawamim, you will notice that Allah is always reminding you in the surah of that the rights of the divine exist, but that the love of the divine exists, love exists, and that Ar-Rahman makes God's love a priority or prevailing over God's rights. So among the traditions that are often narrated about Surah Ad-Dukhan, in a long narrative where the Prophet ﷺ is asked about what Ad-Dukhan means and so on. So, and we'll cover parts of that narrative, but the Prophet ﷺ sees a woman clutching on, holding her baby. And the Prophet ﷺ says, do you see the way this woman is holding tightly to her baby, protectively? And they say, yes. And the Prophet ﷺ says, Allah's love is greater than the love of this woman towards her baby. That in fact, the way Allah feels about human beings is, the presumption is one of deep compassion and mercy. And but for the demands of justice and the necessity of justice, God's mercy would preempt all, and God's love would preempt all. As we will see in Surah Ad-Dukhan, that, however, if we exclude God's justice, in other words, if God's justice does not have an effect, then the entire creation would cease to have meaning. It would become an act of vanity rather than an act of meaning. So among the people like Qushayri, and there are, I mean, this is practically in every Sufi-esque tafsir. Among the reference, or among the things that Hamim connotes, is Allah telling us, if you want to understand what I am conveying to you. Understanding is not possible unless you first reflect upon haqqullah, the ethics of what you owe the divine, the mandates and a priori requirements of justice. But second, you feel the love of Allah, mahabbatullah, that you will never understand anything about your Lord unless you access the love of your Lord. And among them, so for instance, it says, وَالْمِيمْ إِلَى مَوَدَّتِهِ لا شيء أحب إلي لا شيء إلي أحب من لقاء أحبابي ولا أعز ولا أحب على أحبابي من لقائي. So, and among this is that if you understand Allah's love, you also understand that Allah loves our return to the divine. And if you are able to access that, then you will love meeting the divine as much as the divine will love meeting you. So, and this is the at the heart of the entire impulse in the Islamic tradition, that the highest attainment, as Allah says in the Quran, وجوه يومئذ ناظرة إلى ربها ناظرة, that you would be among those who can gaze upon the divine, meeting the divine as the highest level of attainment. There's a lot more, but we need to take it in steps. So, for instance, they talk about حديث الأرواح والميم تدل على ميادين محبته وهموم الأرواح في أسراره, and it goes on to they go on to greater depth in this type of discourse, but for our purposes, I think we will take it in pieces. Otherwise, it will be too much. Okay. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala starts off by saying, pay attention. In this faith journey, in the heart of Islam, and as we will see, it is the Islam that has repeatedly been reaffirmed by Allah across numerous generations. The key is haqq and mahabba, is the rights of the divine and the love of the divine. And right after that, وَالْكِتَابُ الْمُبِينُ. وَالْكِتَابُ الْمُبِينُ, the study Quran translates it as the clear book, but وَالْكِتَابُ الْمُبِينُ, if you want a more precise translation, it would be and the clarifying book, or the book that makes things clear. the book that differentiates between the divine and what is not divine. إنا أنزلناه في ليلة مباركة إنا كنا منذرين فيها يفرق كل أمر حكيم. In the قراءات either يفرق or يفرق كل أمر حكيم أمرا من عندنا إنا كنا مرسلين رحمة من ربك إنه هو السميع العليم. So, let's just first take the translation. So, the clarifying book, the book that makes things clear, which Allah is swearing by, we sent it on a blessed night, ليلة في ليلة مباركة, a sanctified, blessed night. إنا كنا منذرين, because we will always sending a warning. Now here, as we will see, إنا كنا منذرين, meaning we have repeatedly sent the same warning. Time and again. Therein فيها يفرق كل أمر حكيم. In this message, every wise or every matter of wisdom, every matter that requires sagacious wisdom is made clear. So this is not just a message that is telling you believe in God, but otherwise your value system is not affected. When it tells you that this is a message, the foundation for every matter of wisdom, every sagacious matter. Of course, it doesn't escape the interpreters of the Quran that every sagacious matter is not talking about the technicalities of law. That comes much later with the Hashawiyya and the Wahhabis and so on, that say, well, every sagacious matter just means whatever the mechanics of law are. But every sagacious matter is the value system upon which human life ought to be based. The differentiation between what is good, what is hasan, and what is not good, what is qabih. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the early Muslims, as Allah is telling us today, this is a message that is life-defining. It is not marginal. Don't treat it as a marginality. It is life-defining, but at the same time, it is the same message that Allah has repeatedly sent time and again to human beings. Importantly, this message in Surah Ad-Dukhan, as in many surah, is always described by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a rahmah, as a mercy. رحمة من ربك إنه هو السميع العليم. So this is a mercy. Understanding that you live according to the values of this message is a gift of mercy, because without it, you have the absence of mercy. It's like saying, if you don't learn what I'm teaching you, you will live ignorant and suffer the consequences of your ignorance for the rest of your life. But there is a normative connotation to this. There's a normative connotation to this as it occurs repeatedly, as we inshallah will see in the Quran, that Allah's message can never become a vehicle for cruelty. Now, if you understand haqqullah, the rights of God, you understand mahabbatullah, the love of God, that must inform your understanding of rahmatullah, the mercy of God. Those who say we have faith, but all they've ever dealt with is haqqullah, the rights of God, but have never developed beyond that to muhabbatullah, the love of God, will have no idea what rahmatullah, what mercy of God is. So when you tell them the Prophet ﷺ was sent as a mercy unto humanity, or that this message was sent as a mercy unto humanity, they have no comprehension of that, because they've never developed beyond the rights, the huquq. So of course it's not surprising that Al-Qushayri, like many others like Jilani and Ibn Arabi and so on, is very critical of jurists, fuqaha, who have learned the realm of huquq, but in their training in law as legalists had never developed beyond that into the realm of mahabbatullah, and so they don't understand rahmatullah, mercy of Allah. So, Lord of the heavens and the earth and whatsoever is between them, رب السماوات والأرض وما بينهما إن كنتم موقنين. Now this gets us even closer to the purpose of Surah Ad-Dukhan. The Lord of the heavens and the earth and what is between them, إن كنتم موقنين, if in fact you have certitude. Why does in Surah Ad-Dukhan Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala challenge those who are receiving the surah by saying, In kuntum muqinin, if in fact you have certitude? And when Allah says the Lord of the heavens and the earth and what is between them, Allah is calling upon you to reflect on thoroughly upon all of the layers of creation. The heavens and the earth and what is between them, often in Quranic reference, is a reference to what dwells inside. It is, as also in the Quran, when Allah says, look into fi anfusikum, inside yourselves. If you just keep in mind this challenge, if you have certitude, in kuntum muqinin, la ilaha illa huwa yuhyi wa yumit, rabbukum wa rabbu abaikum al-awwalin. Allah, no God but Allah, who gives life and death, your Lord, and the Lord of your forefathers. But what is the issue? بل هم في شك يلعبون. Nay, but they are, it's translated in the study Quran, they are playing in doubt. في شك يلعبون. The expression is remarkable because to have shak, to have doubt is one thing, but what does it mean to have playful doubt? Obviously, the Quran is not talking about we're having doubt to have fun. The Arabic expression is remarkable. في شك يلعبون. So, they are, their path is the path of doubt. But the doubt in itself is vain. It's a form of vanity. Because the doubt is designed to enable the self to submit, or to enable the self not to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it is like when I am determined to invoke doubt, even if I truly, if I was willing to engage you in a serious philosophical discussion, you could prove or demonstrate to me my contradictions and my paradoxes, and I might not be able to defend my doubt. But this type of doubt, الشك اللاعب, is a doubt, it's a doubt for the purpose of vanity. So it runs away from any effort to pin it down and demonstrate its own vanity. So it's a doubt that if it reflects upon creation, it reflects upon creation only to confirm its own doubts. If it talks about Allah's rights or love or mercy, it does so only to confirm its own doubts. It is a doubt committed to doubt. It is a philosophy of life But what is the purpose of this philosophy of life? People much better than I am centuries ago said, well, it is to protect your privileges and your immunities. What you've granted yourself as your, my sacred zones, my rights and entitlements. And I really don't want to forego any of my rights and entitlements because I feel entitled. And so the way I'm going to protect my rights and entitlements is that I will develop my skills at raising doubts. And at the same time, I am committed to not resolving any of these doubts. So even if the most brilliant mind comes to me and says, let's discuss these doubts and let's lay them out logically and honestly, I am ila'ib. I am in fact just playing. So I will avoid and escape the entire situation because I do not want a resolution to my doubts. With this, the Prophet ﷺ was being alerted, as were of course the believers. There are people who have legitimate doubts that they're trying to resolve because these doubts stand as logical, legitimate obstacles to belief. But there are people who raise doubts, and regardless of what you do to resolve these doubts, they're committed to these doubts. And of course, as the Sufi-esque traditions tend to do, is say, always ask yourself, there's the doubt, but there's the motive behind the doubt. Always ask yourself if your doubt truly emerges from an unresolved intellectual issue that you are sincerely trying to find an answer to, or if your doubt is merely a mechanism to protect your privileges and your immunities and whatever you granted yourself as your entitlements. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala I'm sorry, I'm going back a little bit because I forgot. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Allah yuhyi wa yumit, La ilaha illa huwa yuhyi wa yumit. Allah is the one that gives life and death, the Lord of the heavens and the earth and what is between them. In what is often referred to as ta'wilat al-najmiya, or it could be that reference often is to a certain tafsir known as a tafsir al-najmi, or sometimes it just refers to a methodology of tafsir. But in Surah Ad-Dukhan, as in several other surah, they say, be alert that when Allah says, gives life and death, that it is not just living or dying in the superficial sense, but that there is إحياء القلوب بنور محبته وتجلي صفاته, giving life to hearts with the love of Allah. Those hearts that are able to love Allah, it's as if they come to life. While at the same time, hearts that remain resistant to the love of Allah, these are the hearts that effectively die. And the reason they raise this is precisely because في شك يلعبون, that these are the hearts that become like the hearts of an addict, but addicted to protecting the delusions of the self, the desires of the self, and protecting it by constantly saying, I have doubts, but not really wanting to resolve any of these doubts. Okay, so what happens? فارتقب يوم تأتي السماء بدخان مبين يغشى الناس هذا عذاب أليم ربنا اكشف عنا العذاب إنا مؤمنون أنى لهم الذكرى وقد جاءهم رسول مبين ثم تولوا عنه وقالوا معلم مجنون. So wait, فارتقب يوم تأتي السماء بدخان مبين. This is verse 10. So wait or keep watch for a day when the sky brings forth Dukhan, smoke, mubin, a clarifying smoke. Now note, there's something interesting, right? The Quran is described as kitabun mubin, a clarifying book. And the smoke is described as Dukhanun Mubin, a clarifying smoke. But what is this clarifying smoke? Is it referring, and the grammatical structure of this sentence is fascinating because it says, wait until the day where the Sama will come with Dukhanun Mubin. So is it talking about a future event? Or is it talking about an event that took place at the time of the Prophet? Or can it have a further meaning, a deeper meaning than that? So some said, well, this reference to the Dukhan Mubin, there is a narrative that at the time of the Prophet ﷺ, a severe drought struck Mecca. And the drought was so bad that people would, when you know the effects of heat, if you're in the desert, you think you are seeing like a mirage, like vapor. Of course, when you approach it, you find that it's just heat, the delusions of heat. And that it was so bad that it was as if people were seeing smoke, vapor. And that the Meccans went to the Prophet and said, pray for us that Allah would end this drought. And if you do that, we will be Muslims. And he prayed for Allah to end the drought ended, and of course, they didn't come through, they reneged on their promise. This story, although reported very widely, nearly in all the tafsir, is weak. And it's very likely that it never happened. There are many issues with this narrative and when it appeared, and others, of course, said, well, this maybe is talking about one of the things that will transpire before the end of days. That among the things that will happen before the end of time is that there will be some type of smoke that will be toxic, that will contribute to killing off life. But of course, the linguistic expression "Dukhanun Mubin" is a clarifying or distinguishing smoke is very interesting here. And why does Allah talk about that people will plead with God to ease their suffering, and that Allah indeed will ease their suffering, but that they always renege? This gives way to a long discussion about the very heart of the surah, the reference to the smoke. And what is the smoke? The Sufi-esque tradition said the following: Al-Dukhan, دخان الحس وظلمة الأسباب تغشى قلوب الناس فتحجبهم عن شمس العرفان، وهذا عذاب أليم موجع للقلب. أما العارف فشمسه ضاحية ونهاره مشرق على الدوام. And then he goes on to cite evidence. And this is the meaning, as I'll explain inshallah, the meaning that I think is at the heart of Surah Ad-Dukhan. Allah warns of a sama filled with smoke, but smoke that has a function. That smoke is like an alarm system for something wrong, something that induced the smoke. And the passage that I just read, it says that the sama here is, which is, by the way, and often the sama is often said, understood as a metaphor to the sama'un nafs, the heavens within, as well as the heavens without. That there is a heaven within, and the heaven within can be filled with smoke. If you've ever heard my halaqas on the fog, what was it called? The fog? Fog of substance. That the heaven within can be filled with a foggy smoke. If you are paying attention, that foggy smoke, in fact, is like an alarm system that goes off within the self, telling you that you need fixing. That in fact something is off within. Now, how do you know you have that fog within? Typical symptomology of this fog: restlessness, avoidance, discomfort with the self, constant anxiety and depression. You're fundamentally uncomfortable with who you are. You don't like being without distractions. You find that your mind consistently is attracted to doubt. But it is not that you invest a lot of time in trying to investigate your doubts or seriously studying your doubts. It is not that you actually try to do what doubt was created for. And, Allah created doubt so that human beings can grow. But that's not the way you use doubt. You use doubt simply to remain static and undeveloped. You use doubt often as a way to, in a narrative of self-victimization, that you're always the victim, or that you're always the aggrieved party, or that you're always the party that is misunderstood. But fundamentally, you live within that realm of smoke, that fog. And that fog means that you're often restless, depressed, anxious, and at times it becomes too much, and you in fact turn to Allah. And for as long as it lasts, you perhaps even worship and raise your hands and say, Allah, help me. But here is the rub, is that when in fact Allah does help you, you go back to your same habits again and again. You might come closer to Allah for a short while, but you return back to living in a foggy heaven. Literally, in a foggy samawat. So, Sahl, who was one of the tabi'is, the successors, said, Ad-Dukhan قسوة القلب والغفلة عن الذكر. وهي إشارة إلى مراقبة سماء القلب عن تصاعد دخان أوصاف البشرية الذي يغشى الناس عن شواهد الحق، فهذا هو العذاب الأليم لأرباب المشاهدة. So what the passage I was reading from was saying is that it's not only that this fog leaves you in a confused state, addicted to doubt, but that ultimately it hardens your heart. قسوة القلب is cruelty of heart. Your heart, even if you intellectually want to, is unable to love your Maker. But I'll tell you even more. In the Sufi-esque traditions, they say that if you don't love your Maker, you think that you love others, but in fact you don't know what love is. That what love of Allah teaches you is mercy, empathy, and sacrifice. Those who don't know what the love of the divine is and say they love, what they often love is selfishness. They're selfish. And in fact, a relationship with the other that only serves their desires and promotes themselves. At this stage in my life, I tend to agree that a lot of people talk about love, but it's very rare to see there is love as a sacred value that Allah has created. And that type of pure, clean love is rarely seen among human beings unless they purify the soul and cleanse the self. What we often call love are forms of attachments and addictions and dependence and various ways that we connect with each other because we need each other. But that type of elevated, what the Sufi tradition considers real love, the only real love, is really indeed rare. Going back to the time of the Prophet ﷺ, and what Allah knows about the way Surah Ad-Dukhan will be received, as of course, as well as the other revelation, because remember, Dukhan comes right after Taha, and Shu'ara is going to come after Dukhan. That a quick reference that instead of paying attention to what in fact the teachings of the Prophet, what the Prophet teaches. This is 14. What do they, mu'allimun majnoon, that this prophet, or they try to dismiss this prophet mu'allamun majnoon, that, oh yeah, he knows stuff, but it doesn't matter because he's a majnoon. It's sort of the most arrogant and dismissive way you can deal with a knowledgeable person. Because mu'allamun is a concession that yes, this person knows a lot. But what is it that you're saying about this person? Majnoon could be, oh, it's just crazy, or unreasonable, or wants too much, or possessed demonically. All of it would fit. It's like saying, well, oh, this is too crazy. At this point, as we know from the Quranic style, it consistently draws our attention to the movement of history and what happens in the story of humanity. And this reference is a quick one. It's not a very detailed reference, but a reference to, again, the people of the Pharaoh. وَأَنْ لَا تَعْلُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ. You are the affliction of the people of the Pharaoh is their ego, is their sense of entitlement, al-ulu. This is 19. And say, the study Quran translates it, and rise not against God, surely I have come to you with a manifest authority. It's not, وَلَا تَعْلُوا عَلَى اللَّهِ is not rise not against God, but a clear reference to your to the people's arrogance and their sort of high and mighty attitude that make them resistant to hearing any type of message. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding the Prophet of the previous messages that Allah consistently sent, that before you, Moses tried to warn these people not to rely on their egos, and that in fact Moses even said that وَإِنِّي عُسْتُ بِرَبِّي وَرَبِّكُمْ أَن تَرْجُمُونَ. This is 20. When that the reference here in 20, don't stone me, it's too literal. It's like saying a rajm could be stoning, but a rajm was often also used in language to mean any form of condemnation and boycott. So it is like Moses is telling them that I know that you could either stone me physically or stone me by maligning me and slandering me and cutting off all venues to listening to me. because rajm was often considered the way that you boycott a member of society who have done wrong. So you cut that member off. You don't speak to them, you don't sell anything to them, you don't buy anything to them. That was all within, it's a sort of a public shaming and condemnation. That was all part of the institution of rajm. It wasn't necessarily just throwing stones. Often we know that people were sentenced to rajm without stoning. In other words, they were condemned and shunned, but no stones were thrown at them. The shunning itself is known as rajm. So Moses is telling them, even if you deal with me by shunning, there will be no way that I can reach you and no way that you can hear from me. And at a minimum, if you don't follow me, فَاعْتَزِلُونَ, at a minimum, if you don't follow me, don't harm me. In our language today, it's like saying, respect my right to say my piece without persecuting me, without shunning me. Now, of course, it is, consider this, if the Quran is saying this to the Prophet ﷺ, is the Quran telling us something about public morality? That perhaps people have a right to at least speak without being molested? That an evil society is a society that doesn't allow people to at least speak their mind? Because here Moses is telling them, effectively, part of your sin is that you're not just allowing me to speak my mind without hurting me. And definitely, part of what the Meccans are consistently condemned for is that it's not just that they don't believe the Prophet, but that they won't allow the Prophet just to speak. Now, the reason I flag this is that, as we say, the Quran, as I consistently say, the Quran is a continuing revelation and a constant, a perpetual book of ethics. There, embedded in the text of the Quran, is a clear public ethic about a moral society versus an immoral society. And remember that, as we will see inshallah repeatedly, the Quran is extremely hostile to the idea of coercion. At a minimum, if Muslims are learning from the Quran public values, that people have a right to speak without being harmed. And of course, an Islamophobe somewhere will say, oh, even if what they're saying is that they don't believe in Islam, yeah, even if what they're saying is they don't believe in Islam. That's not the issue. The issue is that it is part of human dignity that people have the right to speak without being harmed, even if what they're saying is I don't believe, but also if what they're saying is I believe. So as I said in the khutbah, for instance, when I gave the khutbah where I talked about Nawal al-Sa'dawi clearly is an atheist. I mean, if you read her work, you know she's an atheist. She wrote a book about how God, the devil meets God, and the devil basically corners God into confronting how God is so impotent. God is unable to solve the problems of the world. And in her book, titled something like The God Resigns and Ilahi Yastaqil, the devil, basically has this conversation with God, and the devil tells God, see, you've messed everything up. You can't solve anything. And at the end of Nawar Saadawi's book, God resigns. Because God says, okay, yeah, you're right, devil. I've screwed up everything. I'm a horrible God, and resigns. Now, Nawar Saadawi doesn't write this because she's a believing Muslim. She wrote this because she's an atheist. For all those idiot moron Muslims who've never read anything by her, who's saying, oh, but she was a reformer of women's rights. No, she was an atheist. Yeah, I mean, maybe she spoke for women's rights, if you believe that that's what she did. But not from an Islamic perspective. Don't Islamize her. She was a proud atheist. That's up to Allah, whether Allah respects her principle or not. That's up to Allah. I don't interfere in that. But from a principle point of view, I don't have a problem with Nawal Saadawi's right to speak without being harmed. Of course she has the right to speak without being harmed. I have a problem with a government in Egypt that bans anyone from responding to Nawal Saadawi. So any Islamist doesn't have the right to be interviewed just to respond to Nawal Saadawi, that gives Nawal Saadawi an uncontested privilege of appearing on TV and media and speaking and so on, but jails Islamists if they try to speak. That's what I have a problem with. How did I get into that point?
Free speech.
Freedom of speech.
Oh, yeah, freedom of speech. I don't know. The woman wrote 47 books. If, either you read her books and know what she's actually saying, or just trust someone like me who actually reads her books. I've taken the trouble to read 17 of the 47 books. It got very repetitive because she's always saying the same thing. So I stopped after 17. But I'm so tired of these kids that go on social media, they've never read anything. And they start just spewing and pontificating. And, oh, we're a Muslim feminist, and she must have been a Muslim feminist. No, she was not a Muslim. And she was, in my idea, on the wrong side of feminism. She wanted to legalize prostitution without saying one word about human trafficking. Not one word about all the human trafficking that takes place in Egypt, or the human trafficking that takes place in the Emirat, or in Saudi. In her long career, she lived 90 years, 47 books, not one word about human trafficking in Egypt or Saudi or the Emirat. But she wanted to legalize prostitution. I was just so tired of ignorant idiots that love to pontificate. Okay, fine. Get out of my system. Go back to Surah. Surah Ad-Dukhan, the smoke. The smoke that compels so many people to go on social media and just pontificate. They live, they breathe smoke, they exist in smoke, they sleep in smoke, they wake up in smoke, they are smoke. They're actually not real, they're just smoke. Do you know when you become just smoke? You are smoke. You know what? Let's take 2 minutes. I need to calm down. Ya Allah. Okay, we'll pray us. That will calm me down. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So, among the nice way of putting it, in referring to the Dukhan and the reference in Surah Ad-Dukhan to the Dukhan, to the smoke or the fog, it says, يشير إلى مراقبة سماء القلب عن تصاعد دخان أوصاف البشرية. And this is translating it is a little bit, so سماء القلب, that you, within each of us is a heaven. And I said that this is a staple in Sufi perception of things, but not just Sufi, because it went well beyond just the Sufi school of thought, but that within the heaven of the heart, if you imagine that your heart is situated in its heaven, there are numerous vanities to what a human being away from their Lord can be. So you have the divine essence within. The divine essence situated in its divine source is in harmony and peace, because you know that you yourself, you're not divine, but you are an extension of the divine. But when you lose sight of the fact that you are an extension of the divine, and you become like what do you call that thing when, like, you have a renegade, like a thing that goes off on its own, then you have all these tendencies: the love of creation, the love of invention, the belief in autonomy, the belief in liberty, the belief in your own ego. All of these are what makes us special, but also what makes us dangerous. Now, unrestrained and unbalanced, without the mizan, without the balance, these tendencies cloud the heavens of your soul. And تصاعد دخان أوصاف البشرية, with the statement, is that as these cloud the heavens of the soul, the idea and the method and the way to mahabbatillah, to actually love where you're, it's like a child who has forgotten their own mother. And that child has been spun off to learn again what motherhood means and what being a child to a mother means, becomes very alien. And of course then the consequences of that set in. Okay, so we've reached the reference to Pharaoh. So then when Moses is telling or at least in Surah Al-Dukhan, it is paraphrasing the feelings and the statements that Moses either makes or feels, that at least if you are not going to follow me, then don't be a transgressor, don't harm me. And then فَاسْرِ بِعِبَادِي لَيْلًا, when Allah tells Moses, lead your followers at night, and this is the escape from the clutches of Pharaoh's persecution. And this remarkable expression that so many commentators paused at, وَاتْرُكِ الْبَحْرَ رَهْوًا إِنَّهُمْ جُنْدٌ مُغْرَقُونَ. وَاتْرُكِ الْبَحْرَ رَهْوًا, it's literally, it's like saying, leave the sea in its solid state. Actually, let me see how they translated it. Yeah, and the study Quran says, leave the sea at rest. Truly, they will be a drowned host. Leave the sea. Rahwan, it's like, don't disturb its state. Now, what is this a reference to? At the most basic level is that Moses, the sea parts, Moses crosses, and Moses doesn't want the forces of the Pharaoh pursuing them. So Moses thinks of striking the sea with a stick so that the sea would close and there would be a water barrier. But Allah inspires Moses to, in fact, leave the sea at the way it is. And here is where a lot of commentators pause to think of, and we've encountered this in a different form, but every time the Quran is inviting us to reflect upon something, it is for a reason. The mentality and the psychology of Pharaoh and his followers, those who see the sea has parted, and instead of saying, well, wait, if Moses can part the sea like this, do we really want to be pursuing Moses anymore? I mean, but to have the actual delude itself to say, well, you know what, they've crossed the sea, let's cross right after them. Now, what's interesting is that whether you believe that this was all, a physical occurrence, or that this is a metaphorical story, the point is the psychology of those who are so determined to defy God that they are able to rely on their vain doubts even after they see something like the parting of the sea. So the most clear dispositive proof, but yet they still will not believe. And still the soldiers of the Pharaoh will obey the Pharaoh. As so many then say, well, we ourselves could become so determined, so addicted to the art of doubt, that is no longer a matter of proof. But even when doubt is leading us to the very same type of destruction, like the drowned host, we still cling onto it. Even when we've become thoroughly miserable human beings with our doubt. And in life I've seen this. I've seen Muslims who've turned to atheism, who have become thoroughly miserable, unbearable human beings. Miserable with their family, miserable with their friends, miserable in their life. I even know someone who eventually killed himself. But at so many points, and this guy that killed himself, I often wondered, he was one of my colleagues, your doubt is driving you to utter misery to the point that you don't want to live anymore. But yet you refuse to see anything that might actually make you less miserable. You're so committed to the meaninglessness of our existence, to the idea that you are pointless and I am pointless and everything is pointless. Material things have stopped bringing you happiness a long time ago. A long time ago. But you are so invested in your ego to the point that you are willing to destroy yourself rather than concede anything. It is remarkable. So, for instance, now, this is so one of the commentators says, I think this is, I'm not sure, but I think this is from Ismail Haqqi. It says, كل زمان له فرعين يحبسون الناس عن طريق الله وعن خدمته فيبعث الله فيهم من يذكرهم ويأمرهم بتخلية سبيلهم أو بأداء الحقوق الواجبة عليهم فإذا كذب الداعي قال وإن لم تؤمنوا فاعتزلون فإذا أيس من إقبالهم دعا عليهم فيغرقون في بحر الهوى ويهلكون في أودية الخواطر. So he says that in every age has its pharaohs, the high and mighty and the arrogant. And when Allah sends those that try to reform and try to call them to their conscience, often not only do they resist, but they actually hurt those who they persecute, those who try to reform, to the point that the reformers are forced into a state of being like Moses, of saying, well, at least if you're not going to follow me, just don't harm me. But that ultimately what happens is that while the pharaohs that come after the Pharaoh do not drown in the Red Sea, but they drown nonetheless, and they drown in their own hawa, in their own vanities. And awdiyat al-khawatir means in the chaos of ideas. They are always in possession of a carnival of ideas, but they are committed to none of them. They are only committed to ideas to the extent that these ideas serve their egos. And they use ideas as they serve as their egos and dispose of ideas once they no longer serve their egos. And that is one of the ways that you see the earmark of a pharaoh. Lack of principles. lack of commitment to truth, lack of commitment to anything. Okay. And ولقد اخترناهم على علم على العالمين وآتيناهم من الآيات ما فيه بلاء مبين إن هؤلاء ليقولون إن هي إلا موتتنا الأولى وما نحن بمنشرين فأتوا بآبائنا إن كنتم صادقين أهم خير أم قوم تبع والذين من قبلهم أهلكناهم إنهم كانوا مجرمين. So here then this is I forgot what the reference of the Quran about after the wealth the Pharaoh and his followers built and left behind. And the Quran just reminds you of how often human beings accumulate wealth and then leave it behind, and that others literally inherit this wealth. And I should have forgotten. On 29, فما بكت عليهم السماء والأرض وما كانوا منظرين. Okay. The heavens and the earth, and thus we begin to, neither the heavens nor the earth wept for them, nor were they granted respite. Human ego often makes a living being, the living human, find it difficult to imagine that that existence is without them. So I am sitting here, I am me, but it takes a remarkable discipline of the ego to know that the me that I am is not any more entitled to the air that I breathe than the you that you are. Put differently, it is within my egoism, it is very difficult to actually understand that you, whoever you are, you're not just a physical form that I perceive, but you are fully a being of equal merit and weight to the I that I am. All of us perceive the world from where we are. And the reason that we perceive the world from where we are is that we're so embedded in our own ego that it is extremely difficult for us to imagine that we have no greater legitimacy or greater right than the other being sitting next to us. But the ego that is anchored in the self becomes so deluded that it imagines that as if the world is not going to go on without it. And so when Allah remarks, وَمَا بَكَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّمَاء وَلَا الْأَرْض, the heavens and the earth didn't cry over them. That it's as if Allah is saying, you imagine that you are everything, and because you imagined you are everything, you thought that what you feel and what you want is legitimate enough justification. But in fact, you could be removed from the face of this earth, and the earth hardly notices, in fact doesn't notice you. But there is another thing. There is a hadith to the Prophet ﷺ that says that those who are truly pious, and this is one of those hadiths that Sufis write a great deal about, and that the scholar and the worshipper, al-abid wal-alim, when they leave the earth, whether human beings cry over them or not, the soul of the earth and the soul of the heavens mourn their loss. It is as if Allah is saying, consider your true role and weight as you tread upon this earth. Because the pharaohs will always imagine that they are the end all, the beginning of all and the end all. But in the true measure of things, they're not. Okay. So, وَمَا بَكَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّمَاءُ وَالْأَرْضُ وَمَا كَانُوا مُنظَرِينَ. Heavens and the earth did not weep over them, and they were not given respite. And we saved the Israelites, and we chose them ala ilm, and we knowingly chose them. Now here, this is in Islamic theology an important point. The Israelites, there's a long line of prophets that came through the descendants of Israel. And of course there are the descendants of Judah. And for a period of time, the line of prophets that came through the descendants of Israel were the bearers of monotheism. The question in Islamic theology, let me rephrase that. In Islamic theology, what the problem was with what the Israelites did is that they turned the message of monotheism into a tribal selection. And when they done so in other words, they've said, because we are the descendants of Israel, we are chosen not because we are the bearers of monotheism, but because we are the descendants of Israel. And we have a promised land because we are a particular genealogy. And when they did so, they were no longer chosen. Now in this, the most unnerving reading that you read in the Islamic tradition are the writings that warn Muslims of the same fate. That Muslims were also told, كنتم خير أمة أخرجت للناس, that you were an ummah that was picked, chosen, in order to bear witness. But what happens if this ummah becomes like the Israelites, that believes that they are entitled to merit just because they are who they are, rather than because of the ethical function they perform? Because Allah says, as in the same way Allah unchose the Israelites because of what they've done to the message, Allah could very easily unchose you and replace you with others. Okay. Now, then the Quran refers to Qawm Tubba. And Qawm Tubba, the people of Tubba, let's see how they translate. 27. No, wait. Is it 27?
30.
Oh, yeah. Bring us your, if you are truthful, are they better, or the people of Tubba and those before them? We destroyed them, truly they were guilty. The people of Tubba were of the Hammerite dynasty of rulers in Yemen. And they were eventually, that kingdom, the Hammerite kingdom, was eventually destroyed by the Assyrians in the 4th century AD. But the reference to Qawm Tubba in particular is a reference to one of the rulers of Tubba that reportedly brought his people the monotheism of Moses, in other words, Judaism. And that they followed him until his death. But once he died, they abandoned the monotheism of Tubba and returned to idol worship. And that whether they were destroyed by a natural disaster or destroyed by Assyrian invasion, repeatedly the Quran tells you, reflect on the fact that people, kingdoms rise and fall in learning from the ethical lessons of history. If Muslims would have invested in the modern age on a methodology for studying ethics from history, they would have made a very serious contribution to the way people do history in the modern age. Because right now, that is truly missing from the way that we deal and we wrestle with history. Anyway. Okay. وَمَا خَلَقْنَا السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَمَا بَيْنَهُمَا لَاعِبِينَ ما خلقناهم إلا بالحق ولكن أكثرهم لا يعلمون. We have not created the heavens and the earth and what is between them in vanity. But we created the heavens and earth and what is between them in truth, بالحق. So, what would make creation an act of vanity? If Allah created us and whatever we did on this earth had no consequence, In other words, there is no accountability. The Jews of the time insisted that there is no heaven and earth, and the only reward is in the here now, and the only punishment is in the here now. The absence, the idea of a heaven and hell among the Jews at the time of the Prophet was largely absent. But this is revealed in Mecca long before Muslims come into full contact with Jews in Medina. But Allah is alerting and underscoring that if there were no consequences to what we do on this earth, then in fact creation would be an act of vanity, because it would have no meaning. Whatever you do or not do has no meaning beyond its immediate functionality. But then ask yourself, well, what is the ultimate meaning of functionality? And this is if there is no God, or if there is a God but no consequences, why does it make any real difference if I take care of my family or not take care of my family? If after all, the world only exists through my subjective perception, and I find an opportunity to improve my affairs at the expense of my family, and let's say I'm not an emotional guy, it doesn't hurt me to see my members of my family sad. What's going to stop you? This insistence is a repeated theme in the Quran, that if you are in doubt, and if you want to be consistent with your doubt, not playful with your doubt, but consistent with your doubt, then you will have to concede that there is no point to anything, because there is no meaning in anything. It is all a coincidence and happenstance, and the very foundations of virtue doesn't exist. So creation, وَمَا خَلَقْنَاهُمَا إِلَّا بِالْحَقِّ, that we've only created them in truth. What is this truth? Muslim theologians centuries ago discussing and said, well, the truth is the very principle of justice that gives everything meaning in our existence on earth. Okay. إن يوم الفصل ميقاتهم أجمعين يوم لا يغني مولى عن مولى شيئا ولا هم ينصرون إلا من رحم الله إنه هو العزيز الرحيم. So the decisive moment, the decisive time is Yawm al-Fasl, the day of judgment, where no one can avail another, and we all stand before the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then in Surah Ad-Dukhan there will be a short description of what hellfire is, or what happens in hellfire, and a short description of what happens in heaven. If you look at 49, ذُقْ إِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْعَزِيزُ الْكَرِيمُ. So, there is this unpleasant description of punishment, but the Quran comments on this. This is on, what did I say, 49? Says, taste, surely you are the mighty and noble. Of course, this is sarcasm, but it deserves a pause. You've lived the whole notion of playful doubt or vain doubt was to protect the ego. And you've lived in service of this ego. Holding on to an entirely meaningless existence because you did not put the creator of existence in the creator's place and the meaning that derives from the creator of existence in its proper place. You've lived allowing the fog, the smoke, to grow in the way it grows. And as long as you attained fulfillment of the ego and here and there, now that harsh comment, okay, so you've lived in service of this ego, now confront where it has taken you. You've ignored the signs of danger within yourself. Now confront what happens to this false sense of dignity. Most, of course, there's a literal meaning to these verses, but what's in a lot of the Quranic commentaries, what's fascinating, here's an example, is the non-literal meaning. فيقال خذوه فادفعوه إلى سواء الجحيم وهي نار القطيع والبعد ثم صبوا فوق رأسه من هموم الدنيا وشغب الخوض والخواطر ذق إنك أنت العزيز الكريم ولو كنت ذليلا خاملا لنلت العزة والكرامة. So here it says that when Allah says فَادْفَعُوهُ إِلَى سَوَاءِ الجحيم, when Allah says send them to Jahim, says this is the fire of a qati'a and a ba'd. This is the fire in the hereafter of realizing that you are far away separated from your Lord, the pain and agony that comes from that separation. And when Allah speaks about pour over his head min azab al-hamim, in Sufi tafsirs, they'll always say, or they always note that azab al-hamim are all the agonies and torments that come from being away from your Lord, including all the anxieties and hardship of life in this earth. You've insisted on an arrogant and false nobility for your ego. So suffer the consequences of that ego. Okay, and then the short description of Jannah, the only thing I'll note is that, again, there's the literal meanings that you can, couches and so on, but in a lot of Sufistic tafsirs, as we've now been encountered in several contexts. So it says, الجنة جنة الحقيقة وهي جنة المعرفة بالله والمحبة, that the Jannah in truth is the heavens of knowing what the truth is, or living the truth of closeness to the divine. And a lot of the way that they understand the references to material things in the Quran as something that attracts the most superficial of believers. But the more you fall in love with Allah, the only thing that will quench your longing is nearness to Allah and the knowledge of Allah. فضلا من ربك ذلك هو الفوز العظيم فإنما يسرناه بلسانك لعلهم يتذكرون فارتقب إنهم مرتقبون. So all of this is a gift from your Lord, and only if they would understand this is al-fawz al-azim, this is in fact the great triumph. And we facilitated all of this through your tongue, these lessons. May they remember. And ultimately ending with فَارْتَقِبْ إِنَّهُمْ مُرْتَقِبُونَ. فَارْتَقِبْ is like, be in observance. Because they themselves are in a state of being observed. So, what is the main message from Surah Ad-Dukhan? This is a blessed message. A blessed message sent to humanity. A critical message. What is this critical message? It is a message of mercy to your souls. A message of self-perception and self-understanding. doubt is part of human nature. But those who become addicted to doubt, it is as if they infect the soul with a fire that generates fogs of delusion. If they ignore the fogs, their fate is like the fate of so many that thought that the ego can be served and that meaning can be attained without the divine. But in fact, there is no meaning to existence without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and without resurrection and accountability. And that if your vanity makes you think that you are the center of existence, that things are right and wrong because they make you feel one way or the other, then you are exactly among those that the Quran says, here, suffer the consequences because you thought, Anta al-Aziz al-Hakim, that you are noble and dignified. Surah Ad-Dukhan, after Surah Taha, is telling Muslims there is persecution coming and a severe test, and you must persevere. At the same time, those who face persecution and wither it away will be very tempted to see the world from within the perspective of the persecuted. Look what happened to us. And what happens to us defines existence. Because often that's exactly what happens to you if you've been persecuted, especially if you've been tortured. This is how you see the world. And Surah Ad-Dukhan, as we'll see inshallah when we get to Surah Al-Shu'ara, because the message continues, comes and says, no, it's never about just you. Even regardless of what you've gone through. And if you forget that, you've deviated from the path. Remarkably subtle, but thoroughly moral lesson. Some of the traditions, there's a lot of hadiths that say if you read Surah Al-Dukhan before you go to bed, one hadith says that, 70 angels will pray for you all night. I mean, the part about it's not very, but what is reliable is that the Prophet ﷺ very much encouraged his followers to study and reflect upon Surah Al-Dukhan, because what it told them about what is within. And that's Surah Al-Dukhan. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen.